Assalamu alaikum. Okay, we are talking about the nature of truth and reality as revealed in the surah called the Ants in English. This is the part that is talking about Solomon and his armies. What I have not seen yet is an analysis of this section of the surah in light of truth and reality. And so I think we're missing a lot here as the community of believers from what it is that Allah is trying to guide us to, right? Which again, one of his names is the source of truth. So starting from the kind of near the top, at the beginning of this story, Solomon has gathered together an army, and we are going to walk and talk a little bit. We're in a park. Solomon has gathered together an army that includes jinns and invisible forces, and also some forms of animals. And as he's arranged these folks, he sees that there is a bird missing, right? Later, this bird ends up showing up. And he asks the bird, where were you? Why weren't you here? And the bird says, I was busy flying around, scouting, and I saw, the Queen of Sheba, etc., etc. And what's interesting is Solomon's reaction. First, that he questioned the bird for not being there, but that's like on a completely different point about discipline. But more importantly here is his response to the bird, which is to say, bird, we will see if you're telling the truth, which is like me, and hopefully for you also, which is like, can birds lie, right? Like, can animals lie? Is deception by animals a thing, right? This is a very strange concept. So I invite you to, look at your animal and nature around you, drop a comment. Have you seen your animal lie to you, like your dog or cat or whatever in the park? Can animals be deceptive? But this is interesting because this is Solomon's initial reaction to this report from the bird. We will see whether or not this is true. Like, this man is questioning whether or not this animal is telling him the truth. His immediate reaction is not just to accept the possibility that this could be true, but to think critically and to try to come closer to the actual truth, whatever it is, right? And we know Solomon is supposed to be one of our models for wisdom and knowledge, and that's one of the blessings that he has. So this should be a guide to us. Please drop a comment on this. Okay. Solomon is and while he's marching, he comes across ants on the ground, right? This is where the name of the surah apparently is from, we believe, right? And he hears the ant say, ants, go back home because Solomon's army is here and they might stomp all over us. And Solomon's reaction now is to laugh, which, if you're reading critically, you should pause here also. Say, that's a strange reaction to have, right? Why is he laughing? And then maybe you'll think, like, would Solomon be the kind of person that would stomp across all of these ants with his army of jinns and animals? Would he let the ants pass and go home? Like, would he just stand there with his army and not kill the ants? We know from our Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, that we have these other hadiths and stories of how gentle the Prophet was, waiting until, like a cat had been removed from him, so because the cat was asleep before he rose up from where he was sitting. And we know things like that. So coming back to this point of the story, right, with what the ant is saying, it's like, again, the ant is speaking from something which doesn't appear to be true. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be the truth that Solomon would have marched across the ants with his army, right? And Solomon's reaction is to laugh. What do you make of this ayat when you read it? Did it stick out to you? And what was your reaction? And what do you think of it now that you're considering it, like, from the perspective of Solomon? Do you think that he would have crushed these ants? Do you think that the ant was lying? And If so, I think that there's a lesson here about how our fears, right, can lead us to think something might be true when it's actually not true, or to put a negative spin on something that doesn't have to be that way, right? All right, so we're going to fast forward a little bit more. There's another part of this surah, which is where now Solomon has confirmed that the Queen of Sheba exists, and he asks for the throne of Sheba to be brought to him. And at this point, there's several different beings, at least some of them are jinns, that start boasting about how quickly they can bring the throne to Solomon. Right? Solomon just sits and waits, and then the throne appears in front of him. And here is something else again, right, that is coming again to the point of truth. Because here we have a bunch of empty boasting, right? A bunch of like, rah, but then no throne. And the one that actually brings him the throne was the one that told the truth. And this should remind you of a different ayat, which is when the Prophet Muhammad, right, is calling people to go out into a battle. And there's an ayat there that says, we will know which one of you is speaking the truth about going when you actually go, when the time comes for you to actually go, right? If you actually do go. And so when I read this particular ayat here with the jinns, my mind goes there. What about you? I'm sure you've seen some examples, right, in your own life of people making boasts and through on them. But this, again, is another kind of warning, I think, or a guidance in the Quran for us about our boasts and our speaking, and how we can, be so busy talking about doing something that in the end, the thing doesn't actually end up happening. And the truth then is the thing that actually does end up happening, which is when that throne was placed there. So we've talked about 3 different points now, and let's come to the one that I think is the most interesting. So we're talking about when the Queen of Sheba actually meets with Solomon, and she is shown something that appears to be the throne, right? And the throne is disguised. And so this is the part made me go back and reread the surah, because I'd already been thinking a little bit about truth and reality, but it's when, this part is kind of making it explicit, to me anyway, that Allah really wants us to think about the nature of truth and reality, because it says here that the throne was disguised, right? And so Solomon is presenting the throne to Sheba, which we, the reader, already know this is the actual throne of Sheba that's been brought there. But he presents it to Sheba as a kind of test, and it's meant as a test of her, like, iman, because she says that she's already converted, right, to Islam, or already accepted God. And so he says, all right, do you recognize this thing, right? And waits to see whether or not she recognizes this thing in front of her, whether or not she can tell truth and reality of this disguised object. And she says very carefully, it appears to be, the throne that I had back home. And now I think a lot of commentators interpret this part as showing something about the magnificence of God, or how it is, some magical thing of the throne can be transported from one place to another, which is possibly a true interpretation. But I think what's missing from this analysis is the test itself, which was a test of her iman, and the test was whether or not she could distinguish truth and reality when she saw it with her own eyes from an object that she should be seeing every day, right, back in her own court, whether or not she can tell her own throne, right? Very interesting. And also, when I'm reading, I'm wondering, how did they disguise this throne? They must have done something to it to, make it be somewhat unrecognizable. Otherwise, it wouldn't be much of a test. So she passes, at least to some extent, or at least she doesn't fail, right? She doesn't fail the test at this point. She gives a very careful answer, and then is allowed to progress to the next stage of testing her iman. And This next one is the one where she's entering into the temple or the palace of Solomon. And again, the reader knows already that the ground appears to be something like reflective that makes it look like water or something like that, right? And so here's some like images of what you can imagine that looks like, right? Like I've seen some marble that was polished very, very, that it's reflective and it does look like water, like it's wet, right? I've seen some interpretations that say that this ground is actually like some kind of glass and there's a river flowing underneath. So, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter exactly what that ground is like, but just imagine there's something there. And then Sheba lifts up her skirt so that she can step into this floor that she thinks is actually water. And at this point, the interesting point for us is that she fails the test. Right? She's unable to distinguish the floor that she's about to stand on from water, right? So she's failed in her ability to distinguish truth from reality. And at this point, this is when the Quran tells us that she actually humbles herself and ends up converting for real, right? And it says in the ayat that her former beliefs, right, were holding her back from embracing truth. That something was like working on her mind to keep her from being able to tell that this thing was not actually water, that she could have just stepped forward and not been afraid of getting her feet wet or whatever, right? And maybe, I don't know, now I'm thinking of like that Indiana Jones movie where there's like a bridge of faith or something and you're supposed to step forward with like into like the abyss, right? And if you have enough like iman, then you won't fall because there's actually like a bridge there. But it's like something like that, right? And she failed the test, but then she ends up converting, so maybe she ultimately succeeded. But again, this is like commonly interpreted as being something that shows the magnificence of God, because look at what a beautiful, temple or palace that Solomon had, which I think is actually a little bit of a dangerous interpretation, because it's kind of then associating like material wealth and like the beauty of a palace with like the magnificence of God, when I think the real lesson for us here is again about something to do with this link between iman, right, faith, and the ability to perceive between truth and reality. And so in this surah, Allah provides for us like 5 different examples about this nature of what is true and what is real, right? There is the bird that is questioned. There is the ant, like speaking out of fear. There are the jinns that were lying or boasting. There is Sheba and the throne. And then there's Sheba and the floor. And I think that's really interesting. What do you think? And now, why is this chapter called the ants? Right? So, for me, this is another little hint for us as the reader to reflect on the surah as having to do with truth and reality. I think there's a couple other very interesting analysis to be made here, coming back to the ant's fear of being crushed. But, out of this story, there's so many beautiful lessons to be learned. And so for this particular video, I want to start with truth and reality. Why? Because we're living in a very dangerous time right now where it is very difficult to tell what is true and what is real, right? So most of us are spending a lot of time, including right now, looking through these digital devices. And we know with the advent of artificial intelligence that these videos can be made, they're fake, they can be fake. What you're seeing right now could not even be a real person. Like I could not be real, my voice could not be real. right? The news that you're seeing, you already know, is coming from different sources, which could or could not be real. The algorithms on the internet kind of show you the same thing, that it is that's going to create the most emotional reaction for you, which also affects what is actually true and what is real, can play into your fears or your desires, can lead to more boasting, things that are just not true and not real. So that's why I wanted to start with about truth and reality. So now let me know what you think, and we'll get to some other subjects soon, inshallah.